waka, tūtahi aku mā kune mihi ki ngā whānau me ngā hapu o tēnei rohe, o whangaroa hoki, reira te mihi. He whenua tauri kura whangaroa. Engari, kare anō kia puta ake ngā kōrero katoa e kāna ki tērā wāhi. Nā reira, koe rā te take I tapaina e au, te no tēnei tukupuka ko maia te kupu. He whenua kura huna. So just welcoming everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this small gathering. And I was just acknowledging the whānau and the hapu of this area and the whangaroa. Our matua here spoke earlier about some of that story, and from the perspective of Ngāti Uru, and I just want to acknowledge that. And yeah, I also just said that, yes, whangaroa is he whenua taurikura. It's a beautiful, bounteous place, but it's also a whenua kurahuna. Kurahuna has many meanings. One of them is kind of like esoteric or hidden knowledge, and so I'm just acknowledging that some of the stories have been hidden, and so the purpose of this study really was to try and surface some of that, not really to go into the detail, but to provide a contextual analysis, a thematic analysis, and then that something that may perhaps guide a reconsideration of some of the missing stories. And there are so many stories, and the stories are continuing to unfold. So it's not like it's a closed book, but yeah. Ko waia hau, who am I? My name is Rowan Tautari. I'm not from Whangaroa, but I am from He Taitokerau, and I grew up in a valley called Waihomio, which is, I think, about 35 minutes from Kirikiri, inland, and it was from quite a long time ago. It is a Methodist community, and so I'm from Wyoming on my dad's side, so we're Ngāti Hine, we're Ngāti Kahu o Torongari, and on my mum's side, I'm from Whananaki, which is on the coast. So through my dad, from the inland kind of forested areas, and through my mum from the coastal east coast, north of Whangarei, north of Tutukaka, which is where I live now. So I just wanted to position myself in that story. In terms of my background, I'm a qualified historian. So this is a little bit of a story about my background. When I was 15, my whānau moved to Wellington, and I was at high school then, and my first job was actually at the Waitangi Tribunal, and I spent weeks photocopying the Ngāi Tahu document bank, which was the evidence for the Ngāi Tahu claims. That included all the claimants' evidence, everything, any paper document to do with Ngāi Tahu's claim, I had to photocopy it all for the tribunal. So that was my first job. And then when I was 18, I started at Auckland University studying history, and the tribunal employed me as a student during the holidays to do research for them. And so one of the reports that I worked on at that time as a student at Auckland University was Taranaki, and that involved confiscated, huge amounts of confiscated land. And then you're probably wondering why I'm telling you the story, but I hope it kind of provides context. When I was about 26, by then I was working at Parliament, but the tribunal commissioned me then to write a report on a block of land up here called Puke Tōtara, which is connected to the Puketi forest. and there are connections between the company actually that was taking logs out of that forest and Whangaroa. It's the same company, so there's a kind of broader context to Kaiō in terms of what was taken away from that, or Whangaroa. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of the span of time, that was in 1996 when I wrote that report, and it wasn't until 2016 that that report became part of what was called Te Paparahi o Te Raki, the Northland Inquiry up here. So that's how long. By that time, actually, the claimant, who the tribunal had commissioned me to report, to do the research for this piece of land, he passed away. So it's like an entire generation. So people, Maori are often having to wait for their stories to be told. Yeah, and of course in that hearing, that was when, the stage one of that hearing was when the kōrero about he whakaputanga me te tiriti surfaced, and then the tribunal gave a report, published a report saying Ngāpuhi didn't cede sovereignty, which was quite a shocking thing at the time, but now everybody's used to it. Yeah, and so, but the other hapu claims, those are still awaiting. The tribunal was writing another report for the individual areas of land that have been, that claimants put hapu claims around, and those are going to be in this stage 2 report. So basically, Ngāpuhi have waited, I think, well over 30 years to have this one hearing and to have a report giving them the history of a whole lot of land up here. So that's the background, that's my background. In 2018, Taha, oh, here she is. I'd come back from overseas, and then I understand Taha made a suggestion to the Taha Maori Property Trust that perhaps I could help to research some land stories. And one of those properties was Kaiō. And I met with Rex, Nathan, and there was a bit of a talk, and then I went up to Kaiō. I made contact with Whangaroa Papahapu and asked them, I asked them, well, I offered them my time and suggested, if you'd like to talk to me, I'm doing this land story, I'm happy to meet with anybody and to take on board any information. So this story here then comes out of that. What happened was, once I started doing the research, went down to Christchurch, looked at the archives, went to the Auckland office, looked at Taha Maori archives, I realised it was actually quite a complicated story, and because it was only the second purchase of land that had taken place in New Zealand, the first being Rangihaua, there wasn't really a lot of information that had been, written information that had been kept at the time. Yeah, I did have a look at claimant evidence submitted to the Waitangi Tribunal, and so that was helpful as well. So, generally, the land story policy, it's really a response to the Waitangi Tribunal and their, what would you call it, their direction really in terms of whenua. And something that they'd said, made very clear with the Muri Whenua report, which was from the early 1990s, was that any purchase of land definitely prior to 1830, but possibly prior to 1840, which is the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, it was really debatable whether that was an actual sale, because in their opinion, Maori would not have been familiar with legal tenure or title, or any English words of a legal nature. So, and the Maori world at that time obviously operated under tikanga, which is a system for it's for observing what is right in a Maori sense. So then I was left with this really weird question. Oh, I thought it was going to be simple, and now I find it's not actually a saying, because how could it be a saying? And the tribunal's reports are backing that up, which in the land story policy, the church is one, follows. So then I thought, oh, okay, now how do I approach this? And I looked at the archive, and it was fragmented. It was fragmented. There was snippets of stories. I had to go to Auckland, look at Taha Maori. Some of it was of a later period, then come back to Christchurch, look at there. And some of the information was really around who was there over the last 200 years. I mean, I'm not talking about 1822 now, but in the last 200 years, who was around, what were they doing, and it might have been a case of tracing personal files, of individuals, just trying to glean anything about Kaiō. Furthermore, what I also realised was that a linear chronological study was inadequate to really convey the Maori content, which there was nothing actually about that in the archive. So I thought, okay, this is a visual, just to help with thinking. This is a visual of that time, well, I'm saying of the whenua. So ko te whenua tēnei, this is, does everyone understand what that means? Whenua. This is the land. These are 3 baskets, ngā kete mātauranga, 3 baskets of knowledge. And in this story I talk about how when the ancestors of Maori came to Aotearoa, they brought their mātauranga. They weren't operating in some kind of abyss. They had a very clear system of how to relate to whenua. And these shells are really just kind of like symbolising the ocean, the river, Kaiō River. And these stones are they're meant to convey 2 things. First of all, that in Te Ao Māori, stones talk, they tell stories. And actually, there are lots of references in Te Kaipere Tapu about stones telling stories. And then I thought, and I thought about the ken and what those people, Māori ministers, local tangata whenua, why they decided to build a ken. Because it's such an unusual thing. Kens, had more of a European kind of history. There are kens in places like Scotland, Spain, the Compostela. So why did they do that? And I actually, I have no answer. But I thought, there's a reason why they did that. They wanted that to be a permanent structure, and they wanted that to convey some kind of message. And now 100 years later, I've produced this little I call it a micro book really, but I don't know. And so I've divided that into 6 themes, Kaiō and whenua, and the whenua being located within Te Ao Māori, which means it's papatuanuku, and papatuanuku, as we all know, comes from te orokohanga being the Māori creation story, and everything here has a whakapapa, including these kete, including the harakeke that were used to make them, and there is actually a whakapapa to harakeke as well, and to everything. So this is Te Ao Māori, this is kind of like the whenua living, talking, singing, breathing space. And then we have over here, pretty much most, or if not all, of the written documents or books, publications that give some of the Kaiō story. So we've got the real classic of Wall-E, written over 100 years ago. Toil and Adversity at Whangaroa, written by a Reverend Laws in 1944. And then some more recently written books. And I just might hand this out so that you can just pass it around. But there's also a book that was written in 1922 or 23 by William, Centenary Sketches of New Zealand Methodism. And it's a decade by decade account. So it starts quite early with Kyle. And I just want to ask you a question, just to quickly, looking at this and then looking at that, do you notice anything different? Or what do you think is the difference between that and that? Anyone?
I think just by looking at that, it tells its own story. The story is already presented if you just read it. But with those books, you have to actually open it and find out what is happening. But with this, the story is already presented.
Kia ora. That's
I think you could say the printed word, once printed, loses a lot of its life. Down there, never dies.
Does anyone else have a whakaaro? Put you on the spot.
So my comment would be that there are two different worldviews demonstrated. One which seeks to write things down in a way as seen through the writer. And that is it. It's there, it's deemed to be a permanent record, something which will survive. The other view is something that is alive and will develop over time as the earth and the wind and the rain and the sea impact on it and people impact on all of that.
Yes, I suppose I would say this is quite organic and also including the asset as well. So they're not the same, are they? We can all agree with that. So then as the researcher, because I'm Maori and a woman, Maori woman, I have to kind of mediate this space here. Go into the archives. Actually, archives are quite a scary place, to be honest, because, well, I was quite shocked by some of the things I was reading, some of the comments about Maori, which is who I identify as being. So I had to kind of really spend a bit of time going through that and to get through to what was beyond it. And then think, okay, and process the information that I saw. Like, say as an example, there are comments in the early mission station about Maori women being like, oh, just not very good comments anyway. So I had to kind of put my blinders on with that so that I could keep reading, keep delving, keep going deeper. And in the process of doing that, I realised I have to split the story into themes. First one, Kyle as whenua. That comes first, because whenua comes from Papatuanuku, from Te Oropohara. Mātauranga comes from that time, Māori mātauranga, Māori knowledge. And so to capture even just a tiny bit of that essence, I had to do that. And then Kyle as what I called settler colonial imaginary, which is really the systems, the conventions, the ways of thinking of that time that were common to the Western world as they viewed the non-Western world. And that included the missionary stories. And so I was able, and not just missionaries, but land, property, deeds, titles, all of that legal history I put in that section. And then Kyle as exclusion and Kyle as inclusion, which was like an interplay of two themes. Because what I realised is it wasn't this and it wasn't that. It was a kind of interplay. It was a spectrum of... So there was the missionaries or whoever, the hahi, they were always engaging with people in this world, with Maori. But it kind of was quite fluid. Well, anyway, it was very interesting to me. And then, but in that process of inclusion and exclusion, I realised, hey, some people just aren't even in the story, and that's wahine Māori for a start. So that was kind of, oh gosh, how do I relate to this kōrero if Māori women aren't actually really in it? They're just like they don't have names. They're not given names in these stories. So that was a challenge, but that gave me the idea of exclusion and inclusion. And then finally, Kyle as remembrance, going to the cairn, going to the urupa, the cemetery, all these different ways of remembering, the local remembrance, which is very different to outsiders, and I'm an outsider, and how we remember places, it's a very different kōrero, how the church remembers. So I tried to encapsulate all of that. And then the last one, so that's looking back, te tiro whakamua. Looking back, and then Kyle as yearning, my last theme. How do we look forward? How do we look at this Kyle story and take some kind of learning from it? So anyway, in summary, what I was trying to do was just to surface, contradictions. That's odd. Why is that? And then, why aren't Māori women mentioned anywhere? That surely they were there, obviously. That's, so what's with this? And just to say, oh, interesting, and maybe these are kōrero that could be, by the Wesley Historical Society, could be examined. Another kōrero was the deaconesses, Māori and Pākehā, who had a huge input in the whole of Taitokerau, actually, and they were visiting whangaroa and visiting Māori homes, talking to Māori women. Where is their story in Kyle? So, that's all I really have to say. Thank you. Kwamatu Inaine. Finished. Sorry, just one more thing. I noticed at the Waitangi Museum, as you go out of the Treaty Museum, there's some words above the wall. And actually in the conference papers, the Board of Administration. So I'll just quickly read the English, because it basically encapsulates the story. The tapestry of understanding cannot be woven by one strand alone. Only by the working together of strands and the working together of weavers will such a tapestry be completed. When it is complete, let us look at the good that comes from it. And in time, we should also look at those drop stitches, because they also have a message.
To the Taha Māori Property Trust and the wider Taha Māori constituency for really giving us an insight into, as you say, something we don't often hear. And so thankful for that because it becomes part of our mātauranga now, and we include it in what we are doing. So thank you so much. But I know that our matua arena is here from this whenua, and so matua, if you wanted to say a word, I give you the last word. Halfway.
I'll just do over here instead of here. But I want to say thank you. I've read it. Before I asked if I've read her book, I said, yeah, I've read it 4 times. But I do want to, it is accurate in that you have left us out. And that's because I think one of the difference between that and that is that has whakapapa, and that starts from the savagery of who we were in their eyes. But and when she left our whakapapa out, that was at the respect of who we were as Ngāti Uru, because only Ngāti Uru can tell its story, and that's what she acknowledged. And so I say thank you for that. Because there are, when it comes to the whenua kura huna, there are untold stories in Kyle with relation to the Wesleyan Methodist Church and to our people as Ngāti Uru. When you talk about women, see, that's what they don't write about. There were women there. My great grandmother's sister was there. She was there, and she was one of the tohunga women of that day, of that time, and her name was Kare Kepa, and she is the daughter of Hemi Kepa, and she is also the niece of Tupe, of Tupe, who is the son of Hawawe, and Tupe is the first cousin to the first evangelist in this nation, Ruatara. So they were there. And see, these are the stories that weren't told, but these are the stories that we hold. And these are our stories of who were there. The historians write a thin line on who I was, but never really asked me who I am. They just started at the point of like what I say, heathenism and all these great words they use that came from their whakapapa, not ours. And so when they wrote that, and these tupuna were there at the signing, it's also important that there were Pākehā tupuna there at the day when Catherine and Samuel Lee came. And one of those tupuna is my great-great-grandfather, Wilhelm Rudolph, who was there in 1789 in Kai, who married our Te Parata, his 2 daughters. And from that 2 daughters came my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and a sister that you talk about that wasn't there, and her name was Peti Rudolph. And the history of her in relation to all of these tupuna were there gardening for the Turners, for the Lees. You know, they paint a picture of Catherine and Samuel Turner as the sole Pākehā being there and out there while all the natives were trying to hunt them down and all of this. But my tupuna were there gardening for them, teaching them how to garden. And these are the stories that are in Kyle. But nobody really comes. They don't want to hear those stories because those stories are too good. They're supportive stories to who these missionaries were. And so when they tell the story, they talk the story of Ngāti Uru as being the hapu that ousted, that kicked them out, and the reason why they went over to Mangauna. But Ngāti Uru didn't do that. And I tell you that because, like I say, I'm 6th generation Ngāti Uru, and I come of my great-great-great-great-grandfather is Patuone. And that's on that side of my father's generation. Now he had a son whose name was He Te Irupatu Arapata Patuhore. Well, Ngā Huruhuru is Ngāti Uru, and he had a daughter, Ngā Kirikiri and Hariata, and the son of Patuone married both daughters of Ngāti Uru. So when you go back into our whakapapa, you can see the impossibility of Ngāti Uru chasing them out, because then they talk about going under Patuhune's leadership, leading them out of Whangaroa. Well, Patuhune would not stand for his daughter-in-law's whānau to stand up and do this to the missionaries, and it wasn't that. What they failed to tell you was that Whangaroa, there was over 600 hapu in the 17th, 1800s in Whangaroa, over 600 hapu. And they were living, I'm Ngāti Uru and all of you were all in that same whenua. And so when the missionaries write about Ngāti Uru chasing them out, they deemed that every other hapu in there was Ngāti Uru. Well, it wasn't. It was Kai Tangata. It was Kai Tangata that chased them out. And this is archaic because of their unsupportive nature toward Hongi Hika. When Hongi Hika went on his journeys, he'd collect the hapu in Kaiō, go down the Whangaroa Harbour, and any hapu that didn't support him, he would say to them, when I return, you're going to get hiding. And so that's what happened. And he would beat them up and he would kill them. He practically wiped out Kai Tangata. And when Hongi died, then that hapu rose up. And that hapu attacked who Hongi was protecting. But they could not attack the missionaries. And the history tells you that not one missionary was killed, was ever hurt. They sacked the buildings. They destroyed the buildings because if they had hurt the missionaries, that would have violated the tapu that made them more of first encounter. And so when you come to the cairn, in the middle of that cairn is a rock. There's a rock there. And when on the first encounter, because there was no formal treaty that they could sign, they made a treaty under God. And the traditions of God were that when you make a treaty, you took a rock. Out of the Jordan came rocks, and so they were covenants that were made. And so they took these stones that are made to calm the cairn were special stones, and they had to come from they came from outside of Whangaroa because they were called kamaka stone. They weren't called papa, and they weren't called toka, they weren't called kohatu. So these stones had to come out, and these stones had to be good for nothing. In other words, more to us. There's no such thing as good for nothing, it's just more. So they bought those stones, and that was the more that joined the Ngāti Uru and the missionaries, and they made that covenant there. And in 1822, the cairn was built on top of that. And the stone marks as a memorial to God, not to us. But that God was invoked as a witness on that first day to witness this union of Ngāti Uru and the Wesleyan Church. Now when the Wesleyan Church went to Hokianga, we often say to Ngāti Uru, they should have stayed there. Why did they come back? And yet they came back to land that was not reoccupied. And because once land was tuku i raro i ngō o te atua, it cannot be reclaimed after that. They had to give it back. And so after, I don't know how many years, 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, whatever it was, but the missionaries came back to the same land. And Ngāti Uru never reoccupied that land because they could not reoccupy it because it was given to them. And therefore they had to give it back to us. And so that was the story, one of the stories in Kaiō. So Ngāti Uru didn't chase them out. That was a result of Hongi Hika. When Hongi Hika died in 1827, every hapu that hated him, Whangaroa, got up, raised up, and did all that sort of stuff. So Hongi Hika, when they talk about Hongi Hika and Whangaroa don't appreciate him. We are worse toward him than Tainui are in Whangaroa. Although I come from his older brother, but it's important to realise that Tupe was the first cousin to Ruataha. Both were missionaries. Tupe became the first Anglican missionary in Whangaroa. So the gospel was already here, the presentation. And so when they say that they came to tame us, no, the gospel had already been introduced here by these two of our people. So I want to just share that with a little bit of the story. But we are writing our story. Because we a lot of our stories are in oral, and that's what came before the tribunal. And we never claimed anything before the tribunal, because the issue with Ngāti Uru and its whenua is not a government issue, it's a church, and so it has to come before the church concept, the church. But anyway, I just want to share that. Yeah.
Keita, can you just lead us in a prayer and we finish and go back to session?
Kia ino I tātou. E te ariki o ngā ariki. Tukoa mai tō rangi Māori ki runga ki te menenga e noho ake nei. Tukoa mai tō aroha ki runga I tēnei whānau me ngā uri o Ngāti Uru. Kia tatu iho tō manaakitanga ki a rātou, ki ngā mihinare hoki, kia mātou I hono atu ki tērā hāhi, putano I te motu. Tau mai tō Maori, tō ihi, tō mana, ki wainganui a mātou I tēnei rā. Me te taonga I tuhia e Rowan, hei koha ma te hāhi, ma te hāpuri, e noho aki nei, me ngā kai tiro tiro whānui, ki ngā mahi o tēnei hāhi, I te tau ruarau, rua te kau mā rua, manaki tia mātou, I roto I tō ingoa tapu. Amen. O te Kia tau, kia tau e kātiki, kia te whare, kia te whare, me te aroha o te ata, me te whiunga teita, o te waimata, ahe, ahe.
Amen. Amen. What did they come back for? Yeah, what can we run with it? Koe nā rei tātou ka mātou nei wari wari. Ua hake te take hoki mai nei a nātou kia mātou. But I know when they come back that I guess was already cutting up the people that was damn shitty.
You know, I said that when too when they were talking about it. those years right here, down here.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, because they had a stage all the time.
Mm. Yeah, because I was there but when they were talking about James
Yes.
from Tauranga Bay, from the outside of the Pangaroha, or from the